In 1453, the walls of Constantinople, thought to be unbreakable for 1,000 years, finally fell. And with them, the last remnant of the Roman Empire was destroyed forever. The night air over Constantinople was heavy with silence, broken only by the faint crashing of waves against the sea walls. From the towers of the Theodosian fortifications, watchmen squinted into the darkness, where countless torches flickered like stars fallen to earth. The Ottoman host had arrived. Fires stretched across the horizon, campfires of an army so vast that it seemed to swallow the land itself. Horses neighed in the distance, drums thudded with a steady rhythm, and the ground itself trembled as if anticipating the coming storm. Within the city, the mood was grim. Constantinople, the new Rome, once jewel of the world, now held fewer than 50,000 souls. Its streets echoed with prayers instead of markets. Its palaces stood half-empty, and the once proud empire had shrunk to these walls alone. Yet its people clung to faith and to their emperor, Constantine XI Palaiologos. That night, Constantine walked along the ramparts. His armor was worn, scarred from years of war, but his back remained straight, his eyes steady. Behind him, priests whispered blessings, soldiers tightened their grips on spears, and boys too young for battle tried to stand tall in their father's armor. The emperor paused, gazing out at the sea of Ottoman fires. "So it begins," he murmured. "The end of Rome, or the birth of its legend." Across the water, in his war tent lit by golden lamps, Sultan Mehmed II bent over a map of the city. Only 21, yet already feared. His eyes burned with a fire that unnerved even his viziers. He tapped the parchment where the city walls were marked thick in black. "They call these walls eternal," he said, voice low but sharp as steel. "But stone breaks, faith breaks, men break. I will carve my name upon this city, or I will be buried in its ruins." Outside, the cannons, monstrous engines of iron never before seen, groaned as oxen dragged them closer. The largest of them, the great bombard built by the Hungarian master Orban, was so massive that men whispered it could shatter mountains. The night deepened. Constantinople held its breath. The last empire on earth stood face to face with its executioner. At dawn, the ground shook. A sound like thunder rolled across the plains before Constantinople, so deep and violent that windows shattered inside the city. Children cried out, priests clutched their crosses, and soldiers froze in place. It was not thunder, the skies were clear. It was the voice of Mehmed's cannons. The largest bombard roared again, a monstrous cylinder of iron cast by the Hungarian engineer Orban. 30 feet long, it took hundreds of men and oxen to move it into place. But now it was alive, hurling stones the size of boulders toward the walls that had defied armies for 1,000 years. The first shot struck the outer wall with a deafening crash, sending shards of stone flying like daggers. Men on the battlements screamed, some flung down into the courtyards below. Dust and smoke rose in clouds, veiling the morning sun. From the top of the tower, Emperor Constantine XI gripped the battlements, the tremor of impact running through his bones. For centuries, his ancestors had trusted these walls, the Theodosian fortifications, triple-layered, unmatched in the world. But never had they faced this. The bombard fired again, and again. Each shot tore into the defenses with merciless rhythm. The air itself seemed to split apart with every strike. In the Ottoman camp, Sultan Mehmed watched in silence, his eyes glinting as stone crumbled in the distance. His generals murmured, some exclaiming in awe, others crossing themselves in fear of divine wrath. But Mehmed only smiled faintly. "Do you see?" he said to his men. "Even mountains bow to iron. Soon, so will Constantinople." Inside the city, panic began to spread. Crowds gathered in Hagia Sophia, chanting prayers that echoed through the ancient dome. Mothers clutched their children. Old men wept openly. And yet, when Constantine rode through the streets on horseback, he raised his sword high and shouted, "Romans of Constantinople, these walls have saved us before, and they will save us again. Do not fear their thunder, for God himself watches over his city." The people roared with what courage they had left, but their voices trembled beneath the endless pounding of Mehmed's cannons. The siege had begun. The walls of the last Roman Empire were no longer eternal. The drums of the Janissaries rolled like an approaching storm. Thousands of soldiers marched in perfect rhythm, their white turbans gleaming under the rising sun. Shields locked, spears forward, they surged toward the battered sections of the Theodosian Walls. Behind them, war cries rose to heaven, Allah Akbar! From the ramparts, the defenders answered with cannon fire, arrows, and stones hurled from mangonels. Greek fire, the ancient weapon of the Byzantines, spat from brass tubes, igniting men where they stood. Flames clung to armor, screaming soldiers rolled in the dirt, but still the Janissary columns pressed on, relentless, disciplined, as if pain itself could not stop them. Emperor Constantine rode along the walls, his horse foaming, his armor flashing in the firelight. He shouted to his men, "Hold fast! Rome still breathes in your swords. If the city falls, the world itself will mourn." By his side fought Giovanni Giustiniani, the Genoese commander, who had brought ships, men, and his own iron will to aid the doomed city. With his crossbow raised, he struck down a Janissary officer who had reached the base of the wall. "They'll break themselves against us, Majesty," Giustiniani growled. "Stone and faith, that's what keeps us standing." The clash became chaos. Scaling ladders slammed against the walls. Defenders heaved boiling oil down upon them. Arrows flew so thick they blotted out the sun. The screams of the dying mixed with the roars of the living until the battlefield itself seemed alive with agony. For hours, the waves of Janissaries struck and broke like surf against a cliff. At last, Mehmed signaled the retreat. The ground before the walls was a carpet of corpses, armor glinting like scattered stars in the dust. But the defenders knew this was only the beginning. The great bombard fired again that night, and the walls groaned under its fury. Constantinople had survived the first storm, but the city bled, and Mehmed had patience as endless as his ambition. Day after day, the bombard roared. Its thunder shook the stones loose, cracking towers that had stood for centuries. At night, by torchlight, the people of Constantinople labored like ants, dragging blocks of stone, filling breaches with rubble and earth, patching walls with wooden beams. Women, children, priests, even nobles worked side by side, their hands raw and bleeding, but their hearts unwilling to yield. From his tower, Emperor Constantine watched them with pride and sorrow. He knew their strength was not infinite. Every strike of the great cannon was a reminder. The walls could not endure forever. In the Ottoman camp, Sultan Mehmed walked among his soldiers, his cloak snapping in the night wind. He studied the shattered sections of wall, then turned to his generals. "They patch it by night," he said coldly, "so we will fire by night. Do not let them breathe. Let Constantinople learn that there is no dawn for them." And so the city never knew silence. Night and day, the thunder never ceased. Sleep became a luxury. Fear became constant. Even the stones themselves seemed to moan under the ceaseless pounding. On one terrible afternoon, a tower finally collapsed. Dust and fire erupted into the sky as defenders screamed, buried under rubble. The Janissaries surged forward with ladders and grappling hooks, their war cries rising above the smoke. Constantine himself rushed to the breach, sword flashing. Giustiniani and his Genoese followed, shields raised, their crossbows snapping with deadly precision. Men fell in heaps around them, but somehow, impossibly, the defenders held. Amid the chaos, priests lifted holy icons upon the battlements, chanting prayers loud enough to drown even the roar of cannon fire. The sight rallied the defenders, who fought with a desperation that bordered on madness. When night fell, the breach was filled with bodies, Ottoman and Roman alike, and the walls stood, scarred but unbroken. Yet every man on those ramparts knew the truth. The city was a candle burning against a storm. The flame still flickered, but the wind was rising. For centuries, Constantinople had trusted not only its walls but its waters. The Golden Horn, sealed by a massive iron chain stretched across its mouth, had always been the city's shield against enemy fleets. Behind it, Byzantine and allied Genoese ships waited, their sails furled, their crews restless but confident that no Ottoman galley could breach the harbor. But Mehmed was not like the sultans before him. He did not intend to wait for the chain to rust or for fortune to favor him. Instead, he conceived something no one dared imagine. "Drag the fleet over land," he commanded. At first, his generals stared in disbelief. The hills of Galata were steep, covered in forests and stone. To move ships across them was madness. But Mehmed's will was iron, and iron bends the world. Overnight, logs were laid like a road, greased with animal fat. Horses, oxen, and thousands of men strained with ropes, hauling ships from the Bosporus. Groaning hulls slid across the earth as sparks lit the night sky. The Ottomans sang as they worked, their voices carrying like war drums across the water. By dawn, Constantinople's defenders stared in horror. From the hills above the Golden Horn, the masts of Ottoman ships rose like a forest of spears. One by one, the vessels slid back into the water behind the chain. The harbor, the city's last sanctuary, was no longer safe. Panic rippled through Constantinople. The defenders scrambled to reinforce the sea walls, but the people whispered in terror. If the chain could not protect them, what could? Constantine rode to the harbor, his voice thundering against despair. "Do not falter. Rome still stands, and Rome does not bow to tricks of wood and rope. Fight with me, and the sea shall be ours again." That day, a fierce naval battle erupted in the Golden Horn. Byzantine and Genoese galleys clashed with Ottoman ships under volleys of arrows and cannon fire. For a moment, it seemed the defenders might prevail. Their ships were sturdier, their sailors more skilled. But sheer numbers turned the tide. Surrounded, battered, Constantinople's fleet was forced back to its walls, while the Ottomans anchored their ships within sight of the city's very heart. The waters that had once protected Constantinople now bore its doom. The siege dragged on, and Constantinople began to starve. Markets that once overflowed with spices and silks now stood barren. Bread was rationed. Meat became a memory. The people searched the rubble for roots, boiled grass in iron pots, and whispered prayers as their children wasted away. The churches overflowed. Day and night, processions wound through the streets, icons held high, candles trembling in the wind. From Hagia Sophia, chants rose like thunder, echoing through the emptying city. To many, the end of days had arrived, yet the walls still held. Every breach torn by the great bombard was patched with earth and timber. Soldiers fought with desperation, peasants carried stones and water, and women bound the wounds of men who could barely stand. The spirit of the city did not break. It burned fiercer with every strike. But within the emperor's council, shadows deepened. Constantine XI gathered his few remaining allies, Giustiniani of Genoa, Notaras the Grand Duke, and a handful of nobles. Maps lay before them, marked with red ink showing where the Ottomans pressed hardest. "We cannot hold forever," Giustiniani admitted, his armor dented, his face gaunt from sleepless nights. "The walls crumble faster than we can rebuild them. If Venice does not send aid, we are lost." Constantine's gaze hardened. "Then we die as Romans. Let no man here think of surrender. This city is the heart of Christendom. If it falls, it shall fall with our blood upon its stones." The men nodded, though their eyes betrayed fear. Beyond the walls, Mehmed tightened the noose. His scouts cut off the last paths for supplies. His miners dug tunnels beneath the earth, and his cannons fired without pause. At night, bonfires ringed the city like a necklace of flame, a reminder that there was no escape. One evening, as Constantine walked the ramparts, he paused by a shattered tower. The stones were blackened, corpses half buried in the rubble. A boy, no older than 15, stood there, spear in hand, trembling. "Are you afraid?" Constantine asked him. "Yes, my lord," the boy whispered. "Good," the emperor said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Fear means you understand the price of what we defend. Stand with me, and your fear will be your strength." The boy swallowed hard, then straightened, gripping his spear with new resolve. But as the emperor gazed out at the endless campfires of the Ottomans, even he felt the weight of inevitability pressing down. The city bled, and the storm was far from spent. On May 29, 1453, before dawn, the world ended for Constantinople. The sky was still dark when the first trumpet blasts echoed from the Ottoman lines. Drums thundered, horns wailed, and the ground trembled as wave after wave of soldiers surged forward. Torches lit the night, transforming the plain into a sea of fire. Mehmed had ordered a three-stage assault. First came the irregular troops, the besieged, wild, undisciplined men driven by plunder and rage. They stormed the breaches with ladders and hooks, their cries rising above the din. The defenders rained arrows, rocks, and fire upon them, cutting them down in heaps. The walls shook with the clash, but held firm. Then came the Anatolian regiments, disciplined but expendable. They pressed harder, filling the gaps left by the dead, climbing over corpses to reach the battlements. Greek fire spewed down upon them, searing flesh and armor alike. Still, the Romans and Genoese held, their swords flashing in the glow of burning pitch. At last, the trumpets sounded again. The final wave marched forward, the Janissaries, the elite. Clad in white turbans, their shields locked, they advanced with unshakable rhythm. Behind them rode Sultan Mehmed himself, urging them on. Today, either the city is mine, or I am buried beneath its walls. The cannons boomed one last time, blasting apart the weakened sections of the Theodosian Walls. Dust and smoke filled the air as the Janissaries surged into the breaches. On the ramparts, Constantine XI fought like a man possessed. Sword in hand, cloak torn, he cut down attackers with fury, his voice hoarse as he cried out, "Romans, sons of Hellas, fight with me. Let no foreign hand claim our city while we yet draw breath." Justiniani fought at his side, crossbow blazing, until a cannon fragment struck him, tearing into his chest. Wounded, he was carried from the walls, and with his departure, the Genoese faltered. Panic spread among the defenders. At the Kirkaporta gate, a small postern door left unguarded, Janissaries poured through. A cry went up, "The city is breached!" Chaos erupted. The defenders scattered, the Ottomans surged forward, and the proud walls of Constantinople, which had defied centuries, were overrun at last. And still, in the smoke and blood, Emperor Constantine refused to flee. Throwing aside his imperial regalia, he cried to his men, "Is there no one left to fight with me?" And with that, he charged into the sea of Janissaries, vanishing into legend. The gates burst open. The Janissaries poured in like a flood, their war cries echoing against the stone streets. Panic tore through Constantinople as the people realized the unthinkable. The city was lost. Church bells rang wildly, not for triumph, but for doom. From Hagia Sophia, priests led processions, holding aloft icons, chanting desperate hymns as thousands of citizens crowded inside. They believed the holy sanctuary would protect them, that angels would descend as in legends of old. But no miracle came. The Janissaries stormed the great church, battering its bronze doors until they splintered. The faithful inside screamed as soldiers surged forward, their torches blazing. Gold chalices, relics, and icons were seized. Some resisted and were struck down. Others were dragged away into captivity. The streets were chaos. Smoke and fire rose as houses were looted, women and children seized, and soldiers clashed in desperate last stands. Corpses littered the alleys, their blood flowing like rivers toward the sea. Some defenders tried to rally. A band of Genoese fought to the last near the harbor, cut down one by one. Monks armed with kitchen knives defended monasteries, chanting psalms as they died. Even old men and boys struck at Janissaries with stones, unwilling to surrender their city without a mark. But resistance was hopeless. The empire had bled itself dry. At midday, Sultan Mehmed entered through the gate of St. Romanus. He rode calmly, his white horse stepping over the bodies of the fallen. Behind him, banners of green unfurled, bearing the crescent of Islam. Mehmed gazed upon the city, the ruins, the smoke, the screams. At last, the jewel he had dreamed of since youth was his. He dismounted and strode toward Hagia Sophia. Entering the desecrated church, he looked up at the great dome, still filled with incense and echoes of prayers. "Be silent," he commanded. His soldiers obeyed. Then, in a voice that carried through the vast chamber, he declared, "There is no God but Allah. This house is now a mosque." The chant rolled through the church like thunder. Constantinople, the new Rome, was no more, and outside the city burned. The smoke of Constantinople's burning houses still blackened the sky when Mehmed II ascended the steps of the ancient palace of the emperors. His soldiers lined the streets, their armor stained with blood, their faces glowing with triumph. Drums thundered, horns blared, and the young sultan walked slowly, savoring each step as if the city itself bowed beneath his feet. The Byzantine banners had been torn down, their double-headed eagles trampled in the mud. In their place, green standards of the Ottomans fluttered proudly from towers and gates. The crescent moon, once merely a symbol, now shone as the conqueror of Rome. Mehmed entered the old imperial throne room, where the Paleologoi had once ruled a world-spanning empire. Dust covered the golden mosaics, cracks ran through the marble floors. A kingdom long dead, now finally buried. He turned to his viziers. "Let it be proclaimed," he said, his voice calm yet iron-hard. "From this day forth, Constantinople is no more. This is Istanbul, my capital, my throne, the heart of the empire that will rule both east and west." The viziers bowed low, and outside, the soldiers shouted his name. "Fatih, the conqueror, the conqueror." Yet even in triumph, Mehmed was not blind. He knew this victory was not just for plunder or glory. It was destiny. The dream of every sultan before him had been fulfilled by his hand. And now, he looked beyond the Bosporus, beyond the Aegean, toward the heart of Europe itself. Meanwhile, the city lay in ruins. Corpses rotted in the streets. Survivors were chained, herded like cattle. Noble houses were stripped bare, their treasures carted to Ottoman camps. The Hagia Sophia echoed now not with Christian chants, but with the prayers of imams. Far from the palace, an old monk whispered to a handful of survivors, "The empire is gone, 1,000 years, and now only dust remains." Above the ruined skyline, Mehmed stood at the highest tower of the city. His gaze swept across domes, walls, and harbors, now his. The conqueror was silent for a long moment, then murmured words later recorded by chroniclers. "What a city we have given to ruin." The sun dipped low over the Bosporus, casting its crimson light across the ruined city. Constantinople, once queen of the world, lay broken. Its walls were shattered, its churches defiled, its streets littered with ash and silence. For 1,000 years, it had stood as the beating heart of Rome in the east, and now it was gone. The last emperor, Constantine XI, was never found. Some said his body lay among the countless corpses, stripped of armor and lost to memory. Others whispered he had been spirited away, turned to marble by angels, to rise again when the city would be reborn. But in truth, Rome had drawn its final breath on those walls, its last sovereign swallowed by legend. The people who remained wept quietly, their lives chained to a new master. Hagia Sophia, once the jewel of Christendom, now echoed with the call to prayer. The cross that had crowned its dome for centuries was torn down, replaced by the crescent. In distant lands, kings and popes mourned, but too late. The armies they had promised never came. Europe would awaken one day to the Ottoman threat at its doorstep, but Constantinople was already lost. And yet, even in defeat, the city's spirit lingered. Chroniclers would write of its courage, of its emperor who fought to the last, of defenders who patched their walls with their own blood. They would remember the night when an empire ended, not with surrender, but with defiance. Sultan Mehmed II, now called the Conqueror, stood upon the highest tower, gazing at the sunset. The smoke of burning homes curled into the sky, mixing with the light until the whole horizon seemed aflame. He had seized the greatest prize of all, yet even he felt the weight of history pressing upon him. "Empires rise," he whispered, echoing words no one else would hear. "Empires fall, but cities are eternal." And as the sun vanished, so too did the last light of Rome, swallowed by the night of empire.